In today's current environment, especially in 2025, we've seen so many companies laying off their employees, and maybe you have this slight idea of starting a side hustle. But what goes beyond starting a side hustle is that you grow it to become a business. And in today's video, we'll answer some of these burning questions about starting a business because so many people are apprehensive, and I myself, being an experienced chartered accountant, will answer some of these questions with my friend JJ. JJ is also a serial entrepreneur who have done it all over the years, and we are here to really answer any specific questions that you may have.
Nice. Okay, so today, right, apart from answering some questions, we also want to address some myths, right? Because there's a lot of misunderstood concepts and statements online about starting businesses. And I don't know about you, but I personally have started. I've been in a sole proprietor, a limited liability partnership, and I now run multiple private limited companies. How about yourself? What's your experience in that?
Well, you've been in a lot of stuff, man. But yeah. I started as a sole proprietor. And then I gave up my sole proprietorship and started the private limited. So I skipped the entire partnership and limited liability partnership phase.
So then one of the very common questions online people ask is, what is the difference between a sole proprietor, a limited liability partnership, and a private limited company, which are the three most common structures?
Okay, so to put it very simply, right, these three structures, how they differ is the terms of liability and how you can pay yourself. So for sole proprietorship, it's exactly the same as self-employed person. Like whatever self-employed freelancers that you see out there, they may be operating as a sole proprietor if they are registered. So whatever is the business income, the business revenue will be added on to their personal income and chargeable as a personal income tax rate. For limited liability partnership, it's about the same as sole proprietor, just that now you have several partners, and within that limited liability framework, your risk will be mitigated. But you are still being charged at a personal level for individual income tax rate. Whereas if you look at a private limited structure, it's entirely a different nature. You are separating out a different individual, and in this case, a private limited. So you are two individual entities, right? It's a separate entity, and that means corporates will have their own corporate tax rate. You have your own personal income tax rate. And this is really important when you want to segregate risk. And of course, if you want to diversify your income source, because if you just keep everything, all the business revenue to yourself as a sole proprietor, that may be a risk. Okay, and you want to separate it out, including the risk, the credibility, and other benefits you enjoy as a company instead of an individual.
Yeah, so if you are a freelancer or a what they call a SEP, self-employed person, then you are naturally a sole proprietor. The only difference between a sole proprietor and a freelancer is that usually a sole proprietor is registered with a UEN, which gives you some options of like starting a company bank account, right? But apart from that, they are basically the same. So another myth that a lot of people are asking online, or a lot of people are saying online, is that they are not registering a company, a private limited, because it is very expensive to do so compared to being a freelancer or sole proprietor. But that is not exactly true, right?
You know what is more expensive? The cost of ignorance. Because if you don't level up yourself and educate yourself, you will always hearsay from rumors and online people saying that starting a company is more expensive than a sole proprietorship, which if you just based on the numbers factually, it is true. But if you take on a deeper level and really go and understand what are the exact costs of running a business and what are the various incentives you can enjoy as a new startup business, you realize that starting a business can be less cost intense compared to a sole proprietorship. And I'll give you a specific example, because if you remember what I said earlier, sole proprietor, they will be taxed at individual income tax rate. So whatever they earn from their side hustle or even full-time business, you're taxed at individual income tax rate. Whereas if you look at a private limited company, a corporate tax rate 17%, you may scoff at it. But remember, there's this thing called startup tax exemption, and it's not a hack. It is already written there in IRA's tax table and guideline, where you can just enjoy 4.25% on your first 100K in your first 3 years if you qualify the requirements, which is not hard to qualify. So I think the biggest takeaway if you want to start a business, even as a freelancer, right, you need to understand the difference, the pros versus cons, the benefits, and how you can really save more money as a business compared to a self-employed. And I think that's more important than you thinking that, you know, starting a business is very expensive, I'm very afraid to take the first step, which is what we will really go through in the lesson.
So in a nutshell, on surface, the fees to start a private limited company is indeed on paper more, but because there are a lot of things like structuring and all your tax on all the tax benefits, that actually in the long term it is for us as business owners to be able to see past that, to see long term. So as business owners, you're no longer just responsible for yourself, you are also responsible to answer to the government, which are the people who set all these rules and structure. So as a business owner, what are the key government agencies that we need to communicate with?
Alright, to put it simply, there are only 3 agencies that you need to deal with. Number 1, ACRA. ACRA is our statutory body to register your business and make sure your business filing is on form, right? On form and correct in their books. Number 2 is IRAS, because after you make profits in your company, whether you even make any profits, you still have to file your corporate tax return, even if it's 0. Number 3 is CPF. So if you're dealing with salary, okay, if you pay yourself a salary and you need to make mandatory CPF contributions, then you have to deal with CPF every month. So just these 3, ACRA, IRAS, and CPF.
And with the exception that if you are hiring foreign staff, you will definitely need to have some compliance with MOM as well.
Yes, correct.
Another very common question, okay, this is a question that I had myself years ago when I was first starting a business, which is, what the heck is a corporate secretary? I cannot do myself, meh?
Okay, so corporate secretary, unlike your company in-house secretary, which is like a personal assistant to the boss, so you think of it, it's like a secretary for your company, outsource, if you will. And what it does is that it helps you take away all the administrative and compliance stuff, because you have to pay this person externally to help you do all the filing to ACRA and all these compliance issues that they are more familiar with than you. Now you think about it, can you do the corporate secretary yourself? The short answer is no, because if you are the only director, even this corporate secretary position has to be someone else other than you. And this corporate secretary needs to be licensed and of course hold the relevant qualifications. So don't think that anyone can just do it. And nowadays it's even cheaper to just outsource this service rather than have an in-house corporate secretary. So this person will make sure that you will meet all the deadlines and make sure you have all the documents in place, and they will store all these documents online or offline depending on how they structure it.
And I think the best part about having a corporate secretary is that it's actually not that expensive. Usually it's a couple $100 a year, which comes with a bunch of services, and most importantly, they also remind you of the deadlines when it comes to filing all these important documents like your tax return and your annual return, which is, I think, pretty worth it lah.
Yeah, it's almost like someone keeping check on you because you're so focused on growing the business, and that someone has a clearer mind on how the business should be documented. So that's corporate secretary for you.
And okay, another common question that a lot of people have online is that, or rather the misconception is that it takes very long to incorporate a company. It sounds very daunting, right? Like incorporating. But how long does it actually take to incorporate a company in Singapore?
Okay, so for myself personally, it takes around 1 week. So 1 week is from the contact when you send in the request to the corporate service provider. Of course, the actual incorporation, maybe it just takes 1 to 2 work days from ACRA side. But because you will need to give the documents, provide all this back and forth, maybe for your first time, it takes around 1 week. Okay, but if you can really do it yourself, and if you provide all these documents via ACRA yourself, maybe it can take 1 to 2 work days. But do you really want to do it yourself? That's another question.
Yeah, so if you already have a corporate secretary or already intend to hire a corporate secretary, usually the registration in ACRA can be handled by them.
Yes.
Right? And it's not that expensive either.
Correct. And you save your time because this is the first time you may be looking at all these compliance documents. You don't even know what are they for. So a corporate secretary is really just there to help you ease into the business, to make it not as daunting as you would expect it.
Nice. So actually a corporate secretary is very important because if a corporate secretary is not good, then they don't guide you along as a first-time business owner in the process, then it will be very messy.
Correct. And to choose a good corporate secretary is even more important because it doesn't matter if it's cheap, but if the services rendered are not up to your expectations, next year you want to change, there's going to be a massive move. And all these documents have to be moved to a new corporate service provider. And based on the past records, if it's not done well enough, then you have a lot of headache.
It will be painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pick the correct corporate secretary, right? And if you don't know, ask us for recommendations.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So another common question online is that I think a lot of people are very confused, right, between collecting payments as yourself, as a freelancer or sole proprietor, versus actually running a company, then paying yourself money, right? So it's like, isn't it the same left hand to right hand and like just collect straight? What's the difference?
Okay, so the difference between a sole proprietor or even if you're self-employed, all these payments are paid to your personal bank account because you likely don't have a company bank account, right? But if you're running a private limited business, you definitely need a corporate business account or bank account. So all this revenue will be channeled to your company bank account. And after that, you will then decide how you want to share this money or, distribute this money out in the form of salary, dividends, or director fees. The difference mainly is that the ownership of the funds belongs to you if you are a self-employed and a sole proprietor. But it's very different if it goes to company account. Because you heard of all these drama series, right, where people 盗用公款, misappropriation of funds. That is a legal and criminal activity. So don't play with that.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really important also because it actually can affect a company long term when you get into all these like mess.
Correct.
Right. Okay. This one is very important. Even as an employee, like even for yourself, right? You always talk about CPF is very important. So in business, right? Should you pay yourself CPF even when you start a company? Because as a sole proprietor, the only requirement by CPF is that you have your compulsory MediSave contribution every year. But apart from that, actually you don't really contribute to your CPF unless you voluntarily top up, right? But as a corporate employee, even if you are the owner and the employee, you draw salary, right? And there is like CPF implications or CPF contributions. How do you term it? So should you pay yourself CPF as a founder of a company?
Okay, so all this depends on your perspective and your point of view. So on the contrary to what many people think that CPF is an additional liability, I actually see it as a form of benefit. So the way I want CPF to be distributed and saved up for me is because even after I quit my job, I start this business, I want to have mandatory salary contributions so that I can continue to apply for my credit cards. I have my salary crediting bank accounts. If I take a loan, they will see my salary instead of my NOA as a self-employed. And I'm very sure if you're a self-employed or sole proprietor, you will know of this 30% haircut if you want to go for all these mortgage or loans that will see your salary as a form of income documentation. So I was very determined at the start to pay myself through salary so that I can keep this relationship with both IRAS and CPF and make sure that I have a secure income source. So I don't really detest from CPF, but I understand that many of these self-employed people, they may see CPF as an added liability. But what they may not see is that CPF is actually a consistent monthly thing. You're building up for your retirement funds or even your future housing funds. So don't see all the negative and none of the positive. I think it's always good to have a different perspective. Then you choose which one is most suitable for you. But even so, as a business, you can also don't pay yourself CPF through director fees and dividends. And we'll go through that in deeper level in our course.
Yeah, so basically it boils down to whether you believe in CPF or not right? And I think one thing to take note that's very important is that as a owner of a company that's paying yourself salary, you need to take into consideration the 17% employer contribution as well. So whatever that you're contributing, you have to add another 17% and then note that 20% of your salary will then need to go into contribute to your CPF as well as the regular employment CPF rules. Another common misconception and question online, which is that corporate tax is higher than personal income tax, which is not exactly not true, but if you study it closer, you will find that there are certain interesting rules and laws in place that makes the answer, more complicated.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, JJ? You see, I've been in a few Telegram groups when they talk about business tax, right? It's always 17%. Then only if my sole proprietorship or my self-employed income earns above maybe 160K, where you reach above the 17% tax bracket, then you consider starting a business. Yep. I think all this stems from the lack of education and awareness around how the tax rules work in Singapore. Yep. In fact, the tax rules are very transparent in Singapore. So new businesses start up, they enjoy this thing called startup tax exemption, 4.25% on your first 100K, 8.5% on your next 100K. You think about it, 200K of your income is already taxed below maybe even your individual income tax rate. Do you want to take advantage of this or not? And it doesn't mean you can just stop at one company. If you are that ambitious and you grow a few business organizations or activity, you can even split that up into multiple companies, which is even another higher level. So you think about it, you cannot just base it on 17%. If you really are interested and determined to start a business, you need to read all the tax rules and all the benefits that comes with it. And I assure you, IRS have made multiple resources on this, even YouTube videos, to explain how is it. So they want you to take advantage of it, okay? They are not hiding it somewhere like a hack or strategy that only privileged people know. So I think it's very important to educate yourself on that.
You know, talking about taxes, right? Singapore is seen as a very vibrant business hub because we have what is called a one-tier tax system, right? Some countries, they actually tax twice, right? So what is this one-tier tax system that we all enjoy?
Yeah, so this one-tier tax system basically means that you are only taxed one time on your source of income. For example, when a company receives revenue and maybe deduct all the costs and only charge on the net profit, okay, so once it's charged, right, once the profit has been finalized and you have paid corporate tax, you can then distribute the rest of the profits as dividends. And these dividends will not have any tax. Okay, this is similar to all your investment nature like dividends. And if you look at other countries, maybe they also have a tax on their dividends, but not for Singapore because it's already taxed at source. So once the corporate profit is already taxed, dividends no need to be taxed. But remember, if the company is not taxed yet, means they pay out part of the revenue to your salary is then taxed. Because remember, the company has not been taxed yet, but they tax on your individual income in the salary. So it's the one-tier tax system. You only tax one time for this source.
So whether at the corporate level or the personal income level, there's only one tier.
Correct.
Nice. Okay. So, another very common question that people ask online, and I think it's a misconception also, which is that in order for you to register a private limited company, you need an official office address. That means you cannot use your home as the office address, unlike a sole proprietor.
Okay, so regarding this, right, you don't really need to go out and rent an office just to provide an office address. Nowadays, I think it's more common that most of us work from home, even for sole proprietors or freelancers. So we can either use the home address, or if we have some budget, we can allocate it to a virtual address organization. Okay, so you just have to buy this service. It's like a 1-year subscription, and then you can choose this virtual address as the office address instead of your home address. I think this is more applicable to those who do not want to share your home address in Accra Bizfile, because that may be quite privacy related stuff. So you don't really have to rent an office just to have an office address. Okay, so let's clear the misconception up.
And by right, I think a lot of people also don't do this lah, but by right, if you are using your home address as your official private limited company address, you by right need to seek approval from HDB if you are staying in a HDB flat, and URA if you are staying in a private apartment.
Yeah, and in fact, there are some requirements for them to register your HDB residential address as the business address, because there are some requirements, but you cannot have too many people go in and out of your house, otherwise it will disturb the neighbors. And of course, your business activity, if it's like heavy industrial cooking, generally is a no-no.
Yeah. So doesn't mean that government don't catch you means it's legal and you're doing it right. So there are a lot of requirements to take note before even going ahead to register.
Certainly.
One of the very common misconceptions online as well is that people think that as a private limited company, you need to hire staff. Yeah, you need to hire staff in order to be a private limited company. If not, then I just do sole proprietor, right? But that is not true at all, because I don't hire staff.
Okay, yeah, so this is a very big misconception that when you want to start a private limited means you must be a big boss of multiple employees. Yeah, you want to start multinational company like that. Actually, it's not true. Everyone can start a private limited company even if they are the only employee, they are the only person. Because that's what me and JJ both started, our own personal companies with us as the only employee. That's why our company is called Solo Biz, right? You are the solo person, you start your own biz, you don't have to hire staff. Of course, you can go and hire temp staff, contract staff, or even like overseas freelancers if your budget allows and you want to outsource your process. Okay, no one say you can't do that. And in the future, if you want to hire staff, private limited actually makes it simpler for you because you already have an employee and employer structure. So you know how to handle all these manpower contracts and salary stuff. So it's like a step up if you want to level up your game. If you want to scale up your business and you want to hire more people to grow the revenue, then maybe private limited is the way to go.
Yep. I'm going to throw in another question. I just found it and I think it's quite cool. As a business owner and as a sole proprietor, one thing that some people will also ask is, what does it mean to be GST registered? And I think this misconception that's floating around online, which I had in the past, is that you need to earn more than $1 million per annum to become GST registered.
Okay, so GST registered is a very accounting professional thing. Because a lot of people like myself, last time when we were taught in school, it's only 1M above, then you start to consider GST registration, right? Because this is like mandatory from IRA's perspective. And you see, but even below 1M revenue, you can also register for GST if it works for you. For example, you can now claim the input tax. Okay, GST is now 9%, which means your suppliers charge you 9%. Okay, but if you are registered for GST, you can even claim this 9% back from IRAS if you are GST registered. But it only makes sense if you have a lot of cost of goods that are charging you GST. And now you can also charge your customers GST as well. So of course, this is all very strategic tax rules that you have to read up on IRAS. Okay, we are not like tax advisors or anything. We are just here to provide insight that maybe you have this misconception on GST being 1M revenue that you can register. But if it works out in your favor and that comes with more compliance and admin work, then maybe GST registered even below 1M revenue is suitable for you. So you have to based on your own calculations and situation.
And what I learned in the past few years, right, is that a lot of people also have this misconception that you need to be a private limited company to be GST registered. But you as a solopreneur under sole proprietorship can actually also be GST registered.
Yeah, in fact, anyone can be GST registered under a business structure, but the right question to ask back is that should you be a sole proprietorship to be GST registered? Because now the business liability is on your own asset and your own income. So GST registered is a very big thing, and you probably want to be private limited first before you go and start GST registration.
Agreed. Okay, so I think a lot of people, like you mentioned at the start of the video, they want to start businesses, right? And a lot like starting businesses seems to be like a thing that people are really considering now with layoffs and the changing landscape in industry with AI. It's actually a lot easier to start businesses these days with the assistance of knowledge online and AI. But there's this question floating around online, right? Which is that what is one of the hardest industries to start a business and run a business? I don't know about you, but I'm very clear on what this industry is. Do you have an answer?
I think we might really have the same answer, and that is
F&B. Yes, because I have so many friends who tried to start F&B businesses, and I don't know the actual statistics, but I would say that based on my experience, majority of them, above 90% of them, closed down within the first year.
Yeah. And I want to add on to that, right? The cost to maintain is actually very high. You're starting with a very capital intensive project. For example, your kitchen renovation and equipment, your space rental, your manpower costs. All these are upfront fixed costs before you even start earning any money. So you start losing money from the start. So from a profit and loss perspective, starting F&B is actually very difficult in a way that you are already a loss-making position. And if you start other form of service-based business, that may actually be more profitable because you have minimal costs, but you have maximum revenue. Then you can keep most for yourself. Then if you scale up, then your business revenue grow. But not really the case for F&B.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is that most people who want to start F&B do it not because they have a passion for coffee or food. They do it because they watch some drama, and it's like they romanticize the thought of being a cafe owner, which is very cool, right? In a drama. But then when you actually go down to calculate the profitability, the margins, and the numbers, for most people, the numbers don't make sense.
Yeah, at least in Singapore though. Can't say the same for other countries where the cost of startup is generally lower and maybe manpower costs are much more efficient. And maybe I think this year we have seen an increase in home-based businesses, home-based cafes. What do you have to say about that actually?
Yeah. I think for most people who are into F&B, because they really have a passion to cook, to create dishes, I think having a home-based private dining or cafe is actually a good way to start. It's like F&B on training wheels,
Correct.
Yeah, and once you build up a customer base and then you're like, oh, there's demand for my craft, my food, then you can consider if you want to reinvest some of your profits into actually renting a commercial space lah.
Yeah, it's like a startup space, right?
Yeah, like an incubator.
Incubator, that's That's what they call it. And that's when you really want to consider starting private limited, even as a home-based business, you can come and approach us already. Because from your home-based business, it actually can be a private limited. You don't limit yourself to a sole proprietorship structure.
And what we want to share with you today is that after starting businesses and failing at understanding all these structures and banging all the walls over the years, I think Chris and I have decided that actually all this can be prevented if you just understand the bare basics of what it means to own and run a business in Singapore.
In fact, now that we have AI, it makes it even easier. In the past, we have to search high and low, Google, watch videos, read through IRAs, all these things that we have factored all our time into, and sometimes even making the wrong move and strategy for our business, such that we have to reverse and then take another direction. So we don't want you to make the same mistakes that we did, because we have already experienced it and it's painful. Therefore, we are structuring it into an online education system where we can just deliver the results and the process for you.
And this is called Solo Biz Private Limited. And these courses, which is really, really easy to access and very, very affordable, will be made available to you very, very soon. So keep a lookout. I think as people who have run multiple businesses, like I have run businesses where it's just myself, I've run businesses where I hire freelancers, where I've run businesses where I hire like actual staff. And I think all these things all boils down to understanding corporate structure, tax structure, and efficiency, which you will cover in our upcoming course.
Yeah, and in fact, I started as a sole proprietorship because I don't know anything, and I just have the misconceptions and questions like you. And then once I have all this cleared up, I started my private limited right after. So I gradually changed from a sole proprietor mindset to a private limited business owner mindset, which is more serious. And I know that some of you, your profession may be in like very small base side hustle businesses like home tuition, or you just provide a service-based business, you are an e-commerce seller, you are a live streamer, you are a content creator, and you may think that it's not worth it to start your business, but I can assure you that once you scale beyond a certain revenue, it's time to take a look at the numbers to make sure whether it makes sense for you. And if you're not sure of these numbers, you don't know how to calculate, then you're welcome to join our community where we will help you determine the magic number to start a business as a private limited.
So we'll leave the link to sign up for our course and understand a little bit more about Solo Biz and what we want to do to serve the solopreneur community. We'll leave the links down in the description below. You can check that out. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comments for Chris and I to answer.
And in fact, just for the first lesson of the course, we'll provide a free preview. You'll get the main juice out of it. In fact, if you don't want to take the course, you can just look at this free lesson and you decide whether it's worthwhile for you to start a business. And if you want deeper discussion into that, then feel free to join our community.